continents now, and as much of the developed world rushes to roll out COVID-19 vaccinations, some African countries are still to receive a single dose. Let's take a look at why. Now, immunisation programs face big challenges on the continent due to a lack of infrastructure and some vaccine scepticism. The Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention says that the continent uses about a quarter of the world's vaccines, but it manufactures less than 1% of them, and that near total reliance on imports is a serious problem. The World Health Organization's COVAX program will provide COVID-19 shots for about 27% of Africa's nearly 1.4 billion people. But the Africa CDC's goal is to vaccinate 60% of the population. So how will they make up for that shortfall? Let's discuss some of this. Let's speak to Laura Lopez Gonzalez, who's joining us from Johannesburg. Laura Lopez, good to have you with us. So just let's pick up on that final point. How are nations in Africa going to make up that shortfall?
Right. So we see everyone's pursuing these bilateral deals, which remain very, very murky, very clouded in secrecy with these non-disclosure agreements. Countries are relying on COVAX, primarily AstraZeneca, primarily from the Serum Institute in India, and we see the kind of chaos and heartache that's happening in India. India has defaulted on those doses, keeping those doses for obviously its population in that horrible pandemic that it's looking at. So really what's kind of become the spotlight recently from the Africa CDC is trying to bolster this local manufacturing capacity in Africa. Right now, fewer than 10 firms do any kind of vaccine manufacturing. That's largely confined to the last stages of manufacturing. And what you're seeing again, time and again in these pandemics is that countries' ability to produce vaccine locally really kind of determines their sort of fate in these pandemics. It determines who gets the vaccine and who doesn't. So right now, a lot of eyes are turning inward to see what Africa can actually make for itself.
And that's a really interesting moment, isn't it, to try and get vaccines made on the continent? Because, of course, we know that the World Trade Organization are discussing lifting patents at the moment. But I think critics of this idea point to the fact that India wasn't able to scale up production, and that may have been because some supplies were blocked. Will Africa be able to get enough of the supplies it needs to produce the vaccines?
Well, I think that's a great point. And so when people talk about the waiver and what it could mean for vaccines, when I've talked to people on both sides of the issue, what they've kind of sort of concluded is that, listen, patents are a part of a larger puzzle when it comes to vaccines. They're certainly not the sort of end game kind of piece that you need to solve that puzzle, because a lot of it comes down to technology transfer. But a waiver would allow countries to access things like bioreactors and some of the things needed to make vaccines, which could be especially important when we look at this mRNA technology. So a lot of people in Africa and abroad are thinking that this mRNA technology, which is a little bit easier to make than standard vaccine technology, could allow Africa to leapfrog its way into local production. We know that Rwanda is actively pursuing this, courting manufacturers who they think could do mRNA production of COVID-19 vaccines, like you've seen Moderna do. In Rwanda, Senegal says it's pursuing the same thing, and certainly South Africa producers are also interested in this technology. So waiver is part of the problem with the patents are part of the problem with vaccines, but also we're going to need technology transfer or firms to share that know-how with emerging producers.
Yeah, it's a fascinating moment, and it will mean quite a change to how pharmaceuticals work around the world. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, that's the making of the vaccines, Laura, but of course, once you've made them, it's getting them into people's arms. And I wonder if you can just bring us a little something on vaccine hesitancy in Africa. Obviously, every nation is different, but how is that playing out across the continent, do you think?
I think it's very much top of policymakers' minds. So we saw earlier this year, South Africa took a sort of controversial decision not to continue with AstraZeneca after some early results about that vaccine's efficacy in terms of mild to moderate COVID-19 vaccines. We don't know what it can do for severe COVID-19 caused by the variant that we have here. But talking to policymakers, one of their big motivations was the fact that they didn't want to risk putting a shot into people's arms that they later found didn't work, because it might contribute to vaccine hesitancy. In Malawi, South Sudan, we saw thousands of AstraZeneca doses destroyed this week because they had reached an expiration date. The WHO, Africa CDC, Many people saying, listen, we know that it's safe to use it beyond that expiration date. You can kind of move those dates around a little bit if you talk to the manufacturers. And what those governments said is like, listen, we don't want to risk putting this, giving this to people, them thinking it's past the expiration date, and then it contributing to vaccine hesitancy. So it's really guiding some high-level decisions among among policymakers in terms of Africa's vaccine rollout.
Okay, Laura Lopez Gonzalez, really good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, in Gaza,